Welcome to this explainer. We're diving straight into an ancient rhetorical masterpiece from the book of James, specifically chapter 2, to investigate a seriously fascinating paradox. We'll be drawing directly from Dr. David Bauer's rigorous analysis of this text to see exactly what happens when belief is completely stripped of action. If you've ever wondered what the actual mechanics of a living, breathing belief system look like, and what happens when those mechanics completely fail, well, you're in the exact right place.
It's a pretty jarring image, right? It really leaves us with this massive guiding question. Can a belief system actually be a corpse? We're going to explore how James argues that faith without action isn't just weak or flawed or kind of incomplete. He argues that it is literally dead. By walking through his vivid scenarios and these imaginary courtroom debates, we're going to see exactly why James compares a certain type of faith to a lifeless body.
All right, Section 1, the problem of divided faith or the danger of bifurcation.
So, to really grasp this danger, we have to understand James's absolute disgust with what Dr. Bauer calls bifurcation, basically the splitting of a person's faith from their works. Now, James operates from this foundational Jewish confession from Deuteronomy 6 known as the Shema. Hear, O Israel, the Lord our God, the Lord is one. For James, God is one doesn't just mean there are no other gods out there. It means that God is entirely undivided. He perfectly coheres around a central commitment to do good and to give to his creation. And because God is perfectly unified in his goodness, his followers, they have to be completely undivided too.
Think about it. Because God is this unified whole who consistently acts out his goodness, a bifurcated reality where someone claims to believe in this God but doesn't actually act like him is an absolute contradiction. It's frankly an insult to the very nature of the God they claim to follow.
Moving right along to Section 2, the empty blessing, or speech without action.
To really hammer this point home, James sets up this incredibly vivid hypothetical scenario. Imagine a freezing, hungry person who encounters someone from the community. And that person offers them this deeply spiritual-sounding dismissal. Go in peace, be warmed and filled. It sounds super pious, doesn't it? But the source text points out that offering this polite dismissal to a naked person, and the Greek word used here is gumnoi, carried immense social stigma and shame in the ancient world. They aren't just missing a coat, they are entirely destitute. So this deeply spiritual-sounding blessing is actually a hollow, literally useless substitute for real material help. Honestly, saying go in peace might even just be a polite way of saying, please go away and stop bothering me.
Which leads James to ask a massive rhetorical question. What does it profit? Now, in the original Greek, the term for profit here implies an advantageous effect. James asks this because true Christian faith by its very nature is supposed to have an advantageous effect on the community. If a certain kind of faith can be shown to have absolutely zero advantageous effect on a freezing, starving brother or sister standing right in front of you, well, by definition, it's just not true faith at all.
Okay, pay close attention to how this speaker is actually talking. Notice that phrasing, be warmed and filled. Dr. Bauer points out that this is an ancient rhetorical device called the divine passive. Because of their extreme reverence for the sanctity of God's name, Jewish people back then would often use passive verbs to entirely avoid saying the word God directly. So, be warmed and filled essentially translates to, make God warm and fill you. The speaker knows God is merciful for sure, but they are using the divine passive to completely dodge responsibility. They're passing the buck. They are flat out refusing to partner in God's merciful work themselves.
This brings us to Section 3, the imaginary objector, the diatribe.
So James introduces an imaginary interlocutor to debate this whole issue. It's a classic ancient rhetorical device called a diatribe. This imaginary objector steps up and presents a totally faulty premise. You have faith, and I have works. Dr. Bauer notes that this strange claim might actually be rooted in a misunderstood application of the Apostle Paul's teachings on spiritual gifts. You know, the idea that faith and works are just separable traits distributed differently among people in the church. It's basically like saying, hey man, your gift is believing things, my gift is doing things. We're just wired differently.
James absolutely demolishes this kind of compartmentalization by appealing straight to reality. He demands, show me your faith apart from your works. He's basically arguing that a non-expressible faith is utterly undemonstratable. You literally cannot prove it exists. If it's incapable of producing any advantageous effect in reality, then for all practical purposes, it doesn't exist. It has no vitality. It is exactly like a corpse.
Now we hit Section 4, even demons believe. I like to call this the theological mic drop.
Listen, if you thought the whole corpse metaphor was harsh, James takes his argument a step further with the ultimate theological mic drop. He tells his audience, you believe that God is one. You do well. Even the demons believe and shudder. He's pointing out that if faith is just assenting to a creedal statement, like the Shema, acknowledging that God is one, well, even the forces of darkness pass that theology test with flying colors.
Dr. Bauer highlights this surprising, honestly kind of darkly comedic realization here. In the biblical texts, demons know exactly who God is. Seriously, if you look at the Gospels, Satan and the demons recognize Jesus as the Son of God way before the human disciples ever did. Their theology, it's utterly flawless. But obviously their strict intellectual belief gets them absolutely zero salvation.
And this sets up just a deeply ironic contrast. Think about it. The demons are actually more physically and emotionally aware than the hypocritical believer who just says, be warmed and filled. Because the demon's theological knowledge at least produces a real-world reaction. They shudder in absolute terror of impending judgment. Their belief actually leads to an action, even if that action is just trembling. Meanwhile, the person with dead faith, their belief produces literally nothing at all. In a terrifying way, the demons are reacting more appropriately to the reality of God than the hypocrite is.
Finally, Section 5, the anatomy of true faith, the unified self.
Bringing this all together, we can really see what James is demanding here. Works aren't just some added extra to faith, like an optional upgrade package. They are the essential expression of a fully unified self. According to Dr. Bauer's analysis, true works entail two main things. First, active consistency with your spoken belief. If you say you believe God provides, you must be the mechanism of that provision. And second, actively sharing the work of God. It means becoming a real-world partner with God in His merciful, redemptive activity. It's the action of a whole, integrated human being.
Because God is a God of life, an undivided faith absolutely must breathe through action. It can't just be an intellectual exercise. So as we wrap up this explainer, I want to leave you with a pretty provocative question to chew on. Is your belief merely echoing an empty blessing, maybe passing a flawless theology exam just like the demons, or is it actually coming alive to advantage others? Thanks so much for joining me for this explainer. I really hope this deep dive into the anatomy of faith leaves you with plenty to think about.